if we hadn't been in the position in the migration to be able to do this, I don't really know what we would have done.
How on earth did you manage to land a project of this size in April of 2020 while COVID was starting?
Slack's traffic spikes because everyone's working from home. What if we put IBM into sunset mode first? And it brought down like the QPS 650 to like 250 instantaneously. Basically saved the shard. Like replication lag disappeared.
Today on the show, we have Madeline Wu Short. She has been a software engineer at Ripple and Slack before diving into the wild world of startups as a founding engineer and then general manager at Balsa. And before Balsa ended up, or the team ended up at Airtable. She has done a ton of amazing work across all those companies. And today we're going to talk about how she led one of the most important migrations at Slack, where she helped move the messages data of IBM's data and everyone else's from MySQL to Vitesse. So
yes.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, Madeline.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It is super fun to talk about this project. I feel like it's still my crowning achievement of my engineering career, and I still can't believe we pulled it off.
No small amount of work. It's just messages at Slack, which is like a small part of the overall product.
I know. Yes, everyone was terrified about this migration for like good reason. I mean, like if you lose messages at Slack, that is very catastrophic.
Can't have that happen. So, okay. Just to set the stage a little bit, this is what, 2018, 2019?
This is like 2019. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Slack is in hyper growth mode.
Yep.
Tens of thousands, 100,000 customers.
Yeah.
And some of the biggest organizations have finally made the leap to onboarding with Slack. What actually was the migration here? Moving to Vitesse is a technology change, but what prompted this, and why did Slack decide to even start on this project?
Yeah, so Slack had already kind of undertaken some of the migrations to Vitesse. I think initially, Stuart's idea of Slack was like the largest team we were ever going to see was going to be 100 people, which in hindsight, of course, when you're starting a startup, like that's your wildest dreams. And so, yeah, the data was all team sharded, which of course makes sense if you have 100 people.
Sure.
And then obviously Slack grew tremendously to where you have, like IBM is using it. And team sharding just really doesn't scale for that when you have kind of like 300,000 people in an organization. And so the migration to Vitesse was really started for lots of different tables in order to shard data differently. So I think when Vitesse was first adopted, the question was, should messages be first because it's kind of like the scariest table to change, or should kind of like other tables go first and then we come back to messages? The decision kind of like before my time getting involved in the project was like, let's do other tables and then we'll come back to messages once we've like validated things and maybe when it feels less scary. And so core infrastructure had led kind of like many other migrations to get other tables sharded by user or like channel or kind of other things. But at this point, when I got involved, I was a product engineer on the messages team in core product. We owned everything you kind of think of when you first think of Slack, so like messages, files. It was 5 backend engineers kind of owning all of that, which is a whole different story.
It seems like Slack could spare more people for messages, but
you would think, yes. I mean, we did good work. But yes, I think staffing was always an issue. But and historically, kind of like the migrations had been owned by core infrastructure. And so product teams were kind of brought on to advise, but not really kind of like a core part of the team.
Hmm.
Um, I think we got to the point where everyone knew kind of like IBM shard, which is like 542, which is always bad when you have a pet shard.
They got
Um,
a number.
it
Everyone knew
got
that number.
everyone knew this number, and it got to the point where we like infrastructure was like we cannot make any alterations to the messages table because it is just too hard to kind of like perform that safely. Um,
Oh, wild.
yes, yeah, and it was even to the point where it's like we need to figure something out because like they basically calculated a drop dead date for the shard for IBM based on the like typical growth of like message sending with their current size. Um, and people were like, I think the test migrations were kind of a little notorious at Slack for taking a really long time, and being really tough. I mean, obviously it's like a really complex project to undertake. I also think they'd always been done just purely from like the core infrastructure team, so not partnering with the product side. And I think there are a couple of migrations that were done with like very few people. So either just one engineer, maybe two, but like not their primary focus. And so I think the organization got a little skittish about undertaking like more migrations. They also took like 18 months. That's a long time to kind of like set out to invest in. And so some of the ideas floated for IBM Shard was like, why don't we just time partition it? And we'll put a timestamp in the code base, and like any messages after this time period will just go to a different shard. Um, which, probably would have worked.
That could have
Uh,
worked. I could see that.
it could have worked. I think it made me nervous because I'm like, Slack is in hypergrowth. Ideally, IBM is not our largest customer for a long period of time. Hopefully, we have other customers that, how many if statements are we going to have? Um,
So, um, walk me through a little bit what the like right way to use Vitesse is. Like how was Slack thinking about it, and what was like the ideal state? And then I'm going to come back and ask about like what was not ideal.
Yeah, I think with Vitesse, it's what's really nice is that, like it's still MySQL under the hood. Slack, use MySQL kind of like directly. But you're able, kind of gives you all the power to reshard MySQL very nicely. And like from the application side, you don't really need to know how it's sharded. You kind of just pass in the sharding key, and then Vitesse kind of handles um all of the like complicated sharding logic that's like not automatically built into MySQL. Um, and so for like messages, when we want to reshard by channel, this is something that from the like application point of view, it's still going to hit MySQL at the end of the day, from the database perspective. And we can kind of like reshard the data without the application really knowing it's now sharded by channel versus team.
Got it. Makes a ton of sense. And how was it compare that to like how was it set up that it was on the IBM's data is on one specific shard?
Yes.
How
Yeah.
did Slack organize data previous to Vitesse?
Yeah. So previously it was like a whole team's data would all be on one shard. There's kind of
So
like an
everything.
everything. There's kind of an asterisk to kind of like Slack had a very interesting and complicated like enterprise structure. And so, like you could have, if you had an enterprise Slack instance and there's other workspaces, your workspaces could be on different shards, but your enterprise, would be on one. Um, but if you were kind of like a plain vanilla, like paid team, all of your data would be on one shard, kind of like regardless of how large, yeah, that instance was.
Okay. That makes it a lot more clear why to go to Vitesse. So how long that with all of IBM's data on a single shard, you mentioned there was this ticking clock. How long did you have to actually pull off this migration?
So the like date I want to say was like it was like 12 or 14 months. Yeah.
Hmm.
And
Was
so
was that a high confidence estimate?
so this was I mean, yeah, so this is the scary part, right? Like things could change. And like the thing is that like after, spoiler alert, after we started the migration, things did change where IBM wanted to go wall to wall. So they wanted to get even bigger.
Oh
Uh,
no.
yes. And so I think this made me even more glad that like we decided to invest and like do the migration properly. Um, and then there's even I'll save the kind of like grand finale for later. Um, but yeah, I mean, this is what we kind of like modeled different kind of like ideas for like how fast their messages could grow. But yeah, it's rare that a migration has kind of like such a clear end date. But it turned out to be really helpful in order to really advocate for enough staffing in order to kind of like uh, get the project done. So I ended up partnering with core infrastructure. We got 4 people on the project from the beginning. It was a really nice collaboration between product and infrastructure. We had people who knew a lot about messages and like the write paths and the read paths. We had the expertise from core infrastructure on the test side. And so I think having this really scary date allowed us to kind of get buy-in from leadership.
That makes a lot of sense. I tell me more about the like um I'm assembling a team moment there.
Yeah.
There's like what did you need to know? What people did you need to get in the room in order
Yeah.
to be able to do this? Because it's a very different experience to say we're going to move all the messages inside of
Yeah.
12 months than it is like we're going to move a little channel in however long it takes us.
Totally. Yeah, so I had a good friend on the infrastructure side who had kind of been like chatting to me about this. And, like Maggie was like, I think this makes sense to do as like a partnership. And she was really the one who like planted the seeds. And I was like, yeah, we really need to do this, do this with a full team. I think what I loved about this is we had all the decision makers on the team, which I think really sped up the process. Like we had representatives from everyone. Um, but it was 2 folks from core infrastructure who kind of like handled the nitty-gritty of the test stuff. We needed to set up a new key space that I think was like the largest one they had made in Vitesse so far, just because like messages is a lot of data.
Sure.
It's a lot of storage. And then on the kind of like on the messages side, um, there was a lot of really old code that touched the messages table. When we were migrating over call sites, it was surprising. I mean, surprising and scary. Like there were like raw SQL queries going out to the messages table in different places that we didn't know about. And so yeah, it was really helpful to have kind of like all the expertise in a room, and we like had an offsite and we all sat around a table and like made decisions. And so it was yeah, it was very much like a table project, which felt really good.
Cool. Um how did what did you learn during that phase, that sort of discovery that nobody knew coming into the project? And like how did that
Yeah.
change your plans?
Yeah, I think the thing that surprised me most was, like messages is kind of the most important table at Slack in a lot of ways. You said messages, you received messages. And no one knew like there were columns that literally no one at the company like had the historical knowledge about. Like, yeah. So there were like certain columns where I felt like an archaeologist where I was like trying to figure out like when was this column used? What was it used for? Are we using it anymore? Is it important? And it just felt crazy to me. I'd only been at Slack for like, a couple years at that point. It just felt crazy to me that like I was the one who was like understanding the table, and like figuring out like what does all of this mean. Um, and so that was a big, yeah, I think that was a big surprise. I think also this was around the time when external shared channels was launching. So this is, Slack's feature where you can share a channel kind of like with another Slack instance. And so you can kind of like talk through this. This was an extremely complicated like technical project that like a different pillar was owning. And it was, I think, like a very new initiative. And so there was kind of like we were migrating messages and resharding by channels kind of around the same time that they were doing a lot of like changes to the business logic. And so that just took more kind of like coordination and learning. Though I don't think it was like something that we really had to think about, whereas like previous migrations had to consider kind of like how things change with external shared channels.
Got it. Yeah, and you mentioned that if the data is all sharded by team, external shared
Yeah.
channels breaks that
Yeah.
model.
Yes, yes, which was very complicated for them to think about. It's almost a little bit too bad that maybe this is another reason, like we had it, done the migration even earlier, in order to kind of like help enable that product feature. But yeah, so they had to do like a lot of complicated thinking about like where does this channel live? Who hosts it? How do we know which shard to go to in order to read these messages? And kind of like
Mhm.
all these complicated things. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, all while the tables are being ripped out from under them and moved into Vitesse.
Exactly, exactly. We played very nicely. We had no incidents with them, so
So how did this migration actually work? Because you mentioned that the sort of previous approaches weren't particularly quick.
yes,
Did you
yeah.
approach this differently in order to hit the deadline?
Yeah. So um I was like maybe a little bit of a bully to people because I was like I was like we are doing the bare minimum to migrate this table. And I was really clear about scope. I was like we are not taking any additional cleanup or any additional scope in order to like get this migration done on time. I think previous migrations had done kind of like more cleanup work, or kind of like changed access patterns and kind of undertaken more in their scope, kind of like to do the migration. And it makes sense, you're like fetching all the data, like, it's maybe your only opportunity to kind of like do a large scale, like kind of like refactor, like might as well take it. But I was like so clear. I was like, we have this really scary deadline. We need to do this safely. We need to do this quickly. So we really only only migrated the data. I think the something I look back and like kind of wish we had done is, we had these old columns laying around that weren't used anymore. I kind of wish we had dropped them, but didn't really, yeah, didn't want to add any more scope. We did, I think the one place we added a tiny bit more scope was we like changed some of the reads to read from replica in the Vitesse world, because we were like in there and had so much product knowledge that we could be like this one's, yeah, we know like based on like the right read access pattern, like this one's safe to do. And so also to try and alleviate some shard pressure, we undertook that. But this was like I had a clear North Star for everyone of like we're doing like the least amount of things in order to yeah, kind of finish this migration in time.
That makes a ton of sense. You have a hard deadline and you have to finish it.
Yeah.
Was any of that cut scope contentious?
It was a little contentious at the beginning. I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that there were, kind of like at the very beginning planning stages, there's a lot of like big roundtable meetings about this. I think folks wanted to make more improvements. Like the messages migration had been a thing that like infrastructure had thought about for a long time. There's a lot of kind of hopes and dreams attached to it. And so I think on one hand, it was a little contentious because people wanted more. They wanted the opportunity to do more. I think on the other hand, like it was just so clear to everyone that like there was this date, and like we were in a really bad situation. And so, while it was like a little bit contentious, it didn't never felt like a real option to undertake kind of like these larger scale refactors, or like changing the primary key was something, this was like team channel timestamp. And there had been hopes to be able to drop team out of that
Mhm.
primary key. And if you're sharding by channel, like you can actually do that. But I think other migrations have had more complications by, obviously by changing the primary key. And you're like, we just need to get this done. Yeah, accurately.
Yeah. Needs to finish. It needs to be right.
Yeah, yeah,
Let's get it done.
yeah.
Uh, mm, that makes I love that clarity. I think that makes a ton of
Yes,
sense for any
yes,
large project. Just saying like this is the successful outcome, and then you've got a
totally.
baseball bat to go.
Yeah, yeah. I had this do you know like the seagull meme of the seagulls like screaming? It says like that is screaming. So like literally at the top of my tech spec, it would just like take all the messages and put them into the test. Like that was just like the like tagline. Like that's like literally like just what we did. So yeah, it was really helpful to have that alignment. I don't know if you always have that for projects, especially like migrations, and so it's helpful to have that kind of like back pressure.
Hmm. That makes sense. Okay, so you've got a deadline, you've got clarity,
Yes.
you've got the right team,
Yes.
you're making it work. How
Yeah.
how to go?
I mean, I think this is why I'm still happy to talk about it this many years later. It went really, really well. We had a great team. I have this photo. So I really like, I really like planning. And so I have this photo of like a timeline and sticky notes, of like when we go into like dark mode, when we go into light mode, and kind of sunset mode in these different places. And I had, oh, oh, sorry. Um, and I had kind of like mapped it all out, as we started, to have us finish in like, uh, beginning of April 2020. And we hit it like exactly. And so like we were able to, uh, kind of like we hit every, kind of like mode transition time point where we like hit dark mode when we were supposed to, we hit light mode, and we were able to kind of like finish it even a little bit early. And so it went really smoothly. I know. uh
Okay, I was there and I didn't quite realize this. How on earth did you manage to land a project of this size in April of 2020 while COVID has was starting?
okay. So it's a bit, I know. So this is the other point where yes, yeah, we were incredibly lucky to have started the project when we did, because this is like the most exciting. This is probably why I'm most proud. This is like the most exciting part. So we were running a little bit early, and so we were in sunset mode for well, we were in light mode for everyone. So this is where we're still writing to both Legacy and Vitesse. We're only reading from Vitesse and we're returning that to clients. But we still like theoretically have the option to go back to Legacy because like we're still writing and reading from there. And that had gone really well. I want to say this is like February of 2020. Yes.
No one knows yet.
Yeah, no one knows yet. We have put internally we have moved into sunset mode.
Mhm.
And so internally we are no longer reading from Legacy. Um, and then so we feel pretty good about sunset mode, we feel pretty good about light mode, and then, the lockdown happens. And what happens is Slack's traffic spikes because everyone's working from home and everyone's now coordinating on Slack. And so what we started to see yeah. So what we started to see on IBM Shard is they were getting replication lag that started morning of Eastern time and lasted about to afternoon Pacific. And then it would finally catch up and then it would kind of restart the next day.
Oh my
Uh,
god.
Yeah, and this is terrifying. And we're basically watching like the replication it got bad. And we're just like watching the shard. And um this is the place where like we're ahead of schedule. We're like, what if we put IBM into sunset mode first? And so this will take all the message reads off of legacy. And so it was a little scary because typically we do kind of our enterprise customers last. Um, but we did them first after us internally. And it brought down like the QPS from like six 650 to like 250 instantaneously, and
Amazing.
basically saved the shard. Like replication lag disappeared. It was totally fine. It was totally healthy. Um, and so this is another thing where I'm like, if we hadn't been in the position in the migration to be able to do this, like I don't really know what we would have done. Yeah.
Yeah. That's wild. You were suddenly in a position where IBM, because this is replication lag on the old setup, right?
Yes,
So this is
exactly.
everything
Exactly.
except messages, which we could keep joking about is unimportant, but is actually incredibly important.
Totally. Yeah. 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 So this is like, yeah, lots of different things. Yeah. And it got really scary. And we were able to do this and the shard turned green and went smoothly. And so I think this is the place where I'm like so pleased we're in the position to be able to do that.
I love that. It's so interesting because the one of the themes that I've noticed is that migrations almost always seem to be about like moving almost as slow as possible, given the
Mm,
constraint if we have to get this done at some point,
yeah.
because they're so disruptive and they're
Yeah.
so challenging. But then you get these moments where you're like, no, we did the work.
Right.
We are ready to handle some exogenous spike. And like the world
Ah.
fell apart and the world works from home now. And now suddenly you can handle it and say, yeah, okay, we'll just fix the problem here and cut IBM's traffic by 60% on their legacy shard.
Yeah, I know. It's like you do all the preventative medicine work for like the previous 8 months, and then you kind of get this payoff. I think another moment of that is that during this process, um, like during this whole migration, we heard that like IBM wanted to go wall to wall. We also heard that Amazon was interested in coming in and immediately becoming Slack's biggest customer. Which then there's, like lots of work to be able to support that. But it felt so incredible that kind of like from their like team, shard perspective, we were like, oh, messages will just be sharded by channel for them. Like it will be fine. Like we don't have to worry about kind of the scalability of the messages table for a customer that was like, I don't know, 3 or 4 times larger than our last biggest customer, like something crazy. Yeah.
It's a lot of people. There's a lot of people that work at Amazon, turns out.
There are. I know. My goodness.
Yeah, we had Mode on the show a couple of weeks ago. She talked
Oh,
about
yeah.
Koi Pond and load testing for Amazon, and it was notable, especially in light of what we've just talked about, is that she was looking for problems, right? That
Yeah.
it was not
Mm,
messages weren't going to work because messages were already
mm.
on the test. It was what else is going to fall apart.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was very cool getting to work with her on, yeah, making sure kind of like reactions and all the rest of the things still would work on such a large scale.
So what did IBM what did their change or their decision to go wall to wall mean for the project? And did that happen before COVID or was that like a COVID decision?
That was before COVID. Yeah. So this was before the project was finished. And so I think that this happened like during the migration. This made me even more glad that we had like kind of like really advocated for the full staffing of the team from the beginning. Because like, yeah, with migrations, it's they're very long-term thinking. Like you can't change things, and get immediate results. And I think that we redid the predictions about like when is the shark going to fall over if we like end up increasing this many people. I think we also got a little lucky that like sales cycles take a long time, and so they weren't kind of all going to come on the next day, and so we had some time. But again, it was like in the capacity planning for them going wall to wall, we could say that okay, if we're totally done by April, that's going to be an enough time for them to go wall to wall without having an issue.
Mm-hmm. How did you, kind of a similar question to the estimate at the beginning,
Yeah.
how much did you trust the speed up that it was coming?
So I think other people trusted it more. I really didn't trust it. I was just like, because I mean, like, you never know what's gonna happen. Like literally COVID happened, and it just felt like, um, yeah, it just felt like we like worst case we like finish early, right? I mean, like that's great. And so I think that, um, yeah, I really tried to push for like having four people in a migration for 10 months was like a hard sell to like leadership. And was definitely like the largest team that has worked on a migration for Vitesse at Slack. Um, and so I think I kept on being like, yeah, maybe best case scenario is this estimate, but like, this is like the happy path where things kind of act normally. Um and so it was definitely something that was like, breathing down our neck the whole time of like we have to like keep going. And it's also like it's hard to work on a project for 10 months and like keep that sense of urgency the whole time. Like 10 months is really it's a marathon. It's not a sprint where you're kind of like trying to pull log hours. And so I think being extremely systematic and having these, like each mode transition from like dark mode to light mode, we treated each of those like as a launch. And so I think that also helped break things up and have like kind of like clear goals. And then we kind of like reset and work towards the next mode.
Mm-hmm. That that makes a lot of sense. And actually, that reminds me of a thing I wanted to ask. Like, as you're thinking about, this longer project, breaking it up into those milestones, did you think about, was this just like a pile of work you had to do, or were there opportunities that you could step back and like create tools or create systems that then accelerated the work down the line? And how did you think about like making that investment early versus just doing the work?
Yeah. So I think that we were very fortunate to like kind of be able to piggyback on a lot of the kind of like shared libraries that other Vitesse migrations has like built up. I think this is one of the, like reasons I'm glad messages didn't go first, that like you're not undertaking everything as part of this migration. I think something we did invest more in was the kind of like diff logging, especially for like dark mode. Messages is really complicated. I think there was a column that was just like MSG, that was like a JSON blob that,
Sure, I get it.
yep, that had kind of like all like the message content in it. And so initially it would be like, you know, like this column is different between the test and legacy. And it's like, well, that's not, we need more granularity for this specific migration in order to be able to tell kind of like what potential other call sites went wrong. And so we did more investment there. I think something looking back is that we still like to in order to like investigate the diffs, like we spent a lot of time in spreadsheets, like importing logs, and then like this diff, from this call stack, there's like, I don't know, like 45,000 of them, like, and we'd like work through the spreadsheet and people would take different, call sites to investigate. But it just felt like it, it, uh, it felt really scrappy, in a way where, we were able to get it done. But I'm like, I think in hindsight, I'm like, this felt more kind of like, I don't know, piecing things together than it should have for like a migration of this size. And I also think that in some ways it felt like more of an art than a science to know when it was safe to transition modes. Like we think we understand all the diffs, like we think everything's okay, but I wish there had been kind of like a clear tool to be able to say, like you've resolved, I don't know, like 99% of the diffs. Like there's these ones that are diff only, like or are kind of are don't have a consistent pattern, like green light. Like I think you're good to keep moving forward.
Got it. That makes a ton of sense. That you've got, if you're chugging through those diffs and those logs one by one, you've got to do the work and kind of keeping track of like how far you've come and what is the overall picture. Uh, that feels like something that should be externalizable. Like you should be able to put that in a tool.
Right. I know. I'm like, this is not, like, yeah, this process of going from like dark mode to light mode to sunset mode. Like, this is what every migration goes through. This, we're not reinventing the wheel on this side. It would have been nice also, I think, because, uh, I really took the responsibility as like the tech lead to be the decision maker. Like if I say we go into light mode and something bad happens, like this is on me. Like I really wanted the team to feel like it wasn't on all of them to make the decision to like when to flip these feature flags and move forward. It would have been nice to have like a migration companion in the tooling to be like, like here's what to think. I mean, I think I was very fortunate that like there is so much expertise already in Slack, but I can imagine like if you're doing this at a place that doesn't have kind of like that depth of knowledge, migrations are lonely and they take a really long time. And I think it would be nice to feel like you're not kind of going through it just on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a huge difference between I looked at this data and I made this decision, and I looked at this scattered set of feelings I have and I made this
Yep.
decision.
Exactly.
It's just even if you're wrong, like you have the comfort of like, look, I made a good decision. Sometimes good
Right.
decisions are wrong.
Totally. Yeah, but it was like thoughtful and here's why, and it was very organized. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely. That makes a ton of sense. Um, cool. So tell let's see. I think we've hit all of the bits of the actual migration. What happened after flipping IBM? Was it smooth to get sort of all of the other customers flipped, or were there any surprises in kind of the wind down of it?
There weren't any surprises in the wind down, thank goodness. Yeah, because we were seeing like IBM's charges have moved the worst, but we were seeing kind of this like unprecedented spike in traffic across the board,
Right.
or yeah, for COVID happening. And so yeah, that was really smooth. It was a little bittersweet that after working together for so long, kind of like this team, we had all of our like celebrations, on Zoom in like pandemic world, but we we like officially dropped, the legacy tables for messages on Zoom together. Yeah, and that went smoothly. And then it's fascinating like how quickly you just move on to like the next thing because like then IBM and all of modes work with the Nesh was like immediately like okay, next challenge to go figure out.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the things that's sort of underplayed at working at these hyper growth companies is that they just human brains are not meant to deal with like the line doubles every 8 months or 12 months or whatever it is. It just, yeah, like that was a huge effort and it took everything you had. And then someone else, you probably has to do it again for something slightly different.
Yeah, it just feels like the realm of possibility is just like increased every year. It's
Yeah,
really wild.
absolutely. Um, let me let's maybe flip over into sort of quick fire questions, or maybe not even, because maybe you have longer answers to these and it'd be interesting. Um, so you went through this whole journey.
Yeah.
What if you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice at the beginning? What would that be?
That is a good question. I think it would be just like keep keep going. Yeah, like I think we were able to do that, but I think that yeah, I think like just like keep making like the steady pieces of progress, like the week over week progress, and it's like all gonna come together in the end. Um, yeah, I also think just knowing that like it's gonna be okay, like you're gonna make it to the other side, I think also would have been helpful to know at different points. But yeah, I think I'm very fortunate, like looking back, like I think we made a lot of the right decisions. That doesn't always happen for different projects. And so yeah, I'm really proud of yeah, what the team did together. But I think like yeah, just keep going. Just keep putting one foot in front of the other and you're gonna get there at the end.
You'll be ready when the world shuts down a month before the project ends.
Exactly. I know. Who would have known?
Who would have known? Um, it's it is 2025, so I feel like we have to talk about AI a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, how do you think this? How do you think this would have gone differently
Mhm.
if you had access to AI?
I think it would have. So I think there's two big things. I think it would have helped us. Um, there was a part of this project at the very beginning, where we were migrating all of the calls to the messages table to use like our library, our Vitesse library that kind of handled, like dark mode and light mode and kind of like the nitty gritty under the hood of like does this call go to both legacy and Vitesse? Does it just go to legacy? How does the diffing work? And I think that was surprisingly difficult to like find all the call sites to the messages table in the code base, which was a little bit of something that we hadn't foreseen, or we were kind of just like, we'll migrate the call sites and then we do the hard part. Um, and I think having AI be able to do that or like do the first pass, I think would have been tremendously helpful, especially because we had pretty good unit test coverage at that point, like where we would run the unit tests in like what we call this like pass-through mode, where basically if anything hit the messages like test database that didn't go to the test library, it would, like throw an error. So like, we could have just like had AI kind of like iterate on that, versus engineers, spending a couple weeks trying to figure that out. I also yeah, I also think from the diffing side, like looking at all those logs, and trying to come up with like some, yeah, kind of like some narrative. We spent a lot of time in dark mode doing that. And then like, what do these logs actually mean? Um, why are they happening? Are they worrisome? Are they kind of just race conditions? That was maybe the hardest part of the project was all of that. And I think that feels like something that, a tool could exist to help with.
That's I love that. The most magical moments I've had with AI are when I realize that there is some structure I'm trying to find and I can feed it the right information to like either like obviously it's great when you can just dump a bunch of logs and be like what is the most common error and why, and it sometimes it does it. That's really magic. um but it feels almost more magical if you can dump in a bunch of information and say like, hey, I need you to like group these and then like back out, like start to figure out and like give me a narrative, anything. And even if it's not 100% right, it's so helpful. It just gives you like something to grab onto.
Totally. It's somewhere to start with. And I think like sometimes coming up with that initial hypothesis is like the hardest part. Yeah.
Yeah. I am not built to read 45,000 lines of
Oh
JSON.
my God. I know exactly. I know. Like AI would have no problem. Yes. Like we had to do so much kind of like formatting of the diffs because like, yeah, they were just like incomprehensible. And so we were like, please tell me like, yeah, in our logging, we had to be like, tell me the keys of the MSG blob that are different, and like we had all of this different stuff. And yeah, I mean like AI would have no problem with it. Just figuring that out.
Yeah. I think there's a ton of opportunity in in that kind of like loop. Like if you can get a feedback loop, right? You can say you need it for people, right? Like you finding the improving the diff logging tools and dumping that information out and saying like this is what we would need to go to the next stage. Like that's the kind of thing that if you can feed that back in, you can build a real AI loop around what the heck are we going to do? And then here's a bunch of dumb tasks, right? That everyone I've talked to at least, and I'm curious to get your take on this, is that the most successful things people have done with AI are offloading stupid stuff to it,
Oh,
which makes sense.
totally. Yeah. No, I totally think that. I'm like, um, yeah, I mean, this is a bit of a tangent, but like, my mom, like works at the CDC, does, kind of like runs grant reviews, and a big part of that is like doing kind of like summary notes for kind of like these different scientists. And that takes up like a lot of time to be like thoughtful and put everything together. And I'm just like, this is someone who has extremely specialized skill set, a PhD in psychology, and like doing these like things where I'm like, this would be, it's like, they can't use AI in their jobs right now, but like, yeah, you could do, this could be easily done immediately and then just have someone review it, and use AI. And then like it frees everyone up to do kind of like the more meaningful part of their work. And so I think that like that's what I'm like most excited about, is like cut out the busy work, that everyone's kind of doing, and let folks focus on, what they are specially equipped to do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not computers have never been great at replacing the work that is like complex and meaningful. The point is they go do stuff that like we don't want to do and seems kind
Yeah.
of grindy.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There's just more of those things to do. Um, one since we're just chatting now,
Yeah,
you went to Balsa after
I
Slack,
did.
back to Airtable, another big hyper growth
Yeah.
startup. Startup.
I know.
What's what are your sort of lessons in operating in like, 1,000 person company, 5 person company,
Hmm.
1,000 person company?
Yeah. I think in the like the 5-person company, it's like it feels like the purest form of like kind of like the work we do, because you get such like the product either works or it doesn't, and like you're really like fighting for survival, and so everything's really pure. I feel like when you're at a larger company, like you contribute features, but like the company is default surviving, like it's kind of you it's kind of going to move on with or without you, and kind of like have that, like lumbering continuance. Um, and so I feel like I love the pureness of startups. Like you just really get the feedback. Nothing's sugar coated because it can't be sugar coated. You're just, yeah, you're like truly building. And so I really loved that experience. I think it's also extremely stressful, like I think someone told me this before I started at Balsa, and they, had done startups in the past, and they were like, it's really an emotional journey. Like they're like the hours are hard, they're long, but it's really the emotional piece. And I was like, okay, like I don't know what you're talking about. I'm sure yeah, you get it. And like after
Look, I
starting,
meditate. I drink water every day. I can manage my emotions, and that's just
like,
get into it.
yeah, I'm pretty emotionally intelligent, but yeah, it's crazy. I think that I was also like, it's like the best of times. Yeah, I mean, we put together such a great team at Balsa, and I feel like, and you really get to build a product, and then you really get to build a company. And I think that's a piece that I hadn't really considered, is like you get to shape the culture and you get to make really intentional decisions. And I think that was such a gift. And I think that just seeing like how much impact you can have, I think really taught me. And just made me realize that, even at these larger companies, I think I can have more of an impact than I initially thought I could.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned the clarity of saying like we have to do the messages migration or like IBM's not going to work, and it's like that that really stuck out to me because you don't get that clarity so often at bigger companies.
You really don't. Yeah, I think that's, and it's so motivating to have that clarity. I feel like it really feels like, I mean, this is something that drives me and gives me a lot of energy at work, is being able to like have a really clear impact and say like, I was able to do this and here's what it changed, and like uh here's why that matters. And like, yeah, at these larger companies, it's pretty rare to get that opportunity. I think I was very fortunate at Slack to get that a couple of different times. Like I also worked on WYSIWYG, which felt like a huge project. And but yeah, at other companies, it's like the initiative is works or does it? I think um at Airtable, Balsa was acquired to try out something new, kind of like create a point solution that can try and compete, um, create a point solution on top of the Airtable platform that can try and compete with like kind of like other true point solution companies. And I think it was a really different motion for Airtable, and I think that had a lot of kind of some internal friction. And it's it's gone well from the sales side. I don't know if it makes total sense from the engineering internal side, but it's something where like an initiative that is this big can fail or not kind of like see its full potential at a company that's larger. The company still continues. And so, yeah, I think I really love having that really clear impact, and this project for Slack and messages was definitely that.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I'm 3 acquisitions deep myself, and like that alignment is just so challenging. Like no matter what you do, I've been part of companies where you do it immediately and companies where it's like 4 years later people are still fighting about it. In both cases, the grass is always greener. Like it's never perfect, but the company continues.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Cool. Well, um we could talk all day, but we should wrap up. So, final question: where can people find you on the internet if they want to continue the conversation?
Um, they can find me at the letter M at madelineshort.com. That's my email address. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to message me. Yeah, it was really fun digging this back up from my memory and getting to relive it. I still feel very proud of this team and this project, and so it's always fun talking about it.
It's an amazing project. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, of course.